Our first speaker is Dr. Tulika Said, Madam. She's going to speak on 10 years patient with hemophilia with inhibitor titer 15 beta and its role of immune tolerance induction, practical issues. So Dr. Tulika Said, Madam, she has a major achievements to her credit. She is a Indian panel of experts drafted the NHM guidelines for thalassemia and sickle cell anemia, and she's a founding member of Indian Society of Evidence-Based Medicine, and she's a member of Delhi School of Public Health, examiner for DNB or NBE for hematology, and she has authorized more than 150 papers and more than 40 book chapters, and she's a guide and co-guide to the for more than 30 DM, PhD and MD students, and member CEO AIMS and member of AIMS PG Ethics Committee. And she has done ITI treatment to many hemophilia patients. So I request, Madam, please you start your lecture.
Thank you. So I'll share my slides. So I thank the organizers for this opportunity. And without further ado, I will start with the case. So the case I was asked to discuss about was a 10-year-old male with severe hemophilia, and he's already been diagnosed with an inhibitor, and his inhibitor titer is 15 Bethesda unit. Now, we all know that sometimes inhibitors can be transient. So if you have a very low titer, less than 5 Bethesda unit, you need to check if this could be a transient inhibitor. But in this case, we have a 15 Bethesda unit. So this is not likely to be a transient inhibitor. Now, what do we mean by immune tolerance induction? So basically in immune tolerance induction, it is a little bit like giving prophylaxis. You keep giving the factor until you are able to reduce the antibody production. So you basically exhaust the antibody production by giving repeated doses of factor. But because these patients have inhibitor, you have to also give bypassing agents or include other strategies for managing the bleeding in these patients. And the doses of factor that you give are much higher than the usual doses that are given in prophylaxis. So first and foremost, you have to identify a patient if you're planning to give immune tolerance induction. And to all my friends and colleagues, I always say that if you select the right case, you will get the best result. So because the amount of factor that you're going to need for these patients is going to be a large amount, it's a good idea when you're doing immune tolerance induction for the first time at your center to pick a younger patient, because a smaller size patient will require less factor. Obviously, if it's a low titer inhibitor, you want to make sure that this is not a transient inhibitor. You need to know the titer that you're treating. Sometimes patients with very high titer, like maybe 500 Bethesda unit, this may be a little bit difficult to do an ITI because they may have a lot of breakthrough bleeding and the results may not be so good. So we know that there are some predictors of ITI success. So patients with a lower titer at the time of starting who haven't had a very high historical high titer, these are good patients to select. It is also important to know that you shouldn't start the ITI after many, many years, because then again, you're less likely to have a success, and you must avoid interruption. So you need to do a lot of planning. Now, because of COVID and the lockdown, actually, since last year, we have not started any new immune tolerance, because these are patients who should be seen in the hospital. They should have adequate supply of factor and there should be no interruptions. And we've had a lot of problems with both the transportation and the factor and other things. So if your state is not undergoing any lockdown, that's good. The other thing you must realize is that monitoring is required for patients on immune tolerance induction, and we'll talk about monitoring in a little bit. And because you're going to be giving factor very frequently, minimum is 3 times a week, you may need a central line or some sort of home therapy, and you must have transport. And if the patient lives far away, then you need an alternative arrangement for emergencies. So the current scenario is not very good, but normally what we do is we calculate the amount of factor that we're going to need in the initial period, and then in case we're doing a higher dose, we calculate for that, and we earmark the whole supply of factor for a patient who is undergoing ITI, so that there is no chance of running out of the factor. You must sit down and have a good conversation with the family. This must be an informed consent, because the family has to participate and cooperate. The ITI mean period that we've had for patients to have their inhibitor eradicated is about 9 months to 1 year, but it can be 2 years, it can even be up to 3 years. The failure is actually not said until it's 33 months. So the family and the child have to be prepared for this. There are going to be many injections, many blood tests. They also need to be explained that the titers may actually increase during this period. And often the families get very focused on the titer level, and if there's fluctuations, or if there's a period where the titer increases, they get very discouraged and disheartened. Compliance is important, because even if you have the factor, if they don't take the factor regularly, it's going to be a problem. And you need to have a strategy in place with either bypassing agents, Novo 7 or FIBA, for breakthrough bleeds, because there will be bleeds. And there's also no guarantee that the inhibitor titer will be eradicated. The ITI success is about 70%, no matter what kind of a protocol you use. But there will be some patients who will not respond to the protocols. So the major protocols are the Bond protocol, which uses about 100 to 150 units per kg, and this is given 12 hourly, which basically means you're getting about 200 to 300 units of factor VIII every day. And this is a daily regimen, and they give bypassing agents along with that. The Malmo protocol has, again, very high factor VIII. They also give immunosuppressants and IVIG. And then there's the Dutch or the von Crewald protocol, which was initiated by Brackman. And this uses lower doses of factor VIII, 25 to 50 international units every other day. So this is roughly a 3 times a week protocol every other day, just like we do for prophylaxis. But again, with this protocol, you may have to give increments. And this is the protocol that we have used in our center. And we usually start with 50 units per kg every other day. So that's about 3 times a week. And then in case patients don't respond or they have an increment in titer, then every 3 months, we can actually increase the dose by 25 to 50 units per kg. So this is the regimen that we have used. There are other strategies of doing ITI. People have added rituximab. People have done ITI with extended half-life factors. They've done ITI with emicizumab prophylaxis. They've done ITI using a factor VIII product that contains VWD. But well, the current WFH 2020 recommends that a ITI should be started for all patients with inhibitors. We chose at our center to do the classic low dose ITI regimen. The difference between the high dose and the low dose, there's only one study. There's an international ITI study, and they found that the results were equal in both the low dose and the high dose. So it was 70% achieved tolerance. The difference was that the bleeding rates were higher in the low dose. So they had more breakthrough bleeds. And the time to achieve tolerance was again was slower in the low dose, though it was not that much difference. The only thing was that all patients who had a very high titer, they tended to do worse. So if you're starting to do ITI, don't take patients with this very high titer, because even with the high dose or the low dose, they may not do so well. So the product that is recommended is to use the same product with which they developed the inhibitor. But as I said, there are many other strategies of using either VWD product or extended half-life product. So just like when you're going on a journey, you need to prepare. So be prepared. Be also prepared for problems and other things that can happen. And so this is just a short course of a patient that we had. So this was a male who had been on episodic factor, and he'd had several bleeds, and he had tested with an inhibitor positive because he was not responding to the factor that he was usually responding to. And we followed him for a few months, giving him bypassing agents, but then realized that he really needed an ITI. So this patient was then started on the initial ITI. Initially, we started on 50 units per kg, and we continued to give him that. And initially, there was a fall in the titers, and everything looked really good until, unfortunately, the patient had an episode where he had a fall and a bleed. And with that, we found that his titers were going up. And so we increased by that time, it was about 3 months. So we increased the amount of factor we were giving, and we increased it from 50 units per kg to 100 units per kg. And we continued him on this along with bypassing agents for managing the bleed. And thankfully, the inhibitor titers subsided, and then we were able to manage this patient. So this is, it's very important to explain to the child that there will be ups and downs. And now just a little bit on the testing. Now, when we normally do the Bethesda assay or the Nijmegen Bethesda assay, there is a washout period. Now, in patients who are on immune tolerance induction, we do not want the washout period because we don't want them to have, you know, a long period where they are not going to be getting factor, because this constant factor is actually what helps to reduce the antibody production. So there is a method which is done, approved by the CDC and was recommended by Miller, in which we actually do the sample after collection but before you do the Bethesda assay is heated at 56 degrees for 30 minutes. And this is very good because especially for patients who have very low levels of inhibitor, you will avoid getting a false negative. Now, a false negative in this scenario is important because you may think that you have eradicated the inhibitor, but actually the small amounts of factor that are there because you're doing the ITI, this will lead to a false negative and you will stop the ITI prematurely. So when do you decide that this is successful? First, when the inhibitor titer is no longer measured. So either you have a washout period, but if you don't do the washout period, you will do the heat inactivation. You also should do a factor recovery. So you give a calculated dose and you make sure that the recovery of the factor within half an hour of giving the factor dose is about 66%. And you can, if available, do a half-life of the factor rate. But we definitely make sure that these two factors are there, and we do the pre-analytic heat inactivation. And only then we say that we have a success. We recently, the first child that we had, when we started his ITI, he'd been 10 kilos. He came to us recently and he's now 46 kilos. And he's back on prophylaxis for the last 5 years. So it's important to put these patients back on prophylaxis, because if you don't give prophylaxis, then again, the inhibitor will come back. Now, when do you call it failure? Sometimes you have to admit that there's a failure. And this is when you've given the proper ITI, and up to 33 months since you started the ITI, the inhibitor hasn't gone, and there's not even a 20% decrease in the inhibitor titer over 6 months. So that's considered failure, and that's when you may want to do different strategies for salvaging these patients. And the WFH also says that at least one trial of ITI should be done. And in case that one trial is a failure, then you can put them on prophylaxis with non-factor products. The reason being that the cost burden of putting a patient on bypassing agents for life is very, very large. So if you can eradicate the inhibitor, it's really good. So to summarize, the von Creveld or the low dose, it's very good. But again, try to not take patients maybe, I mean, I put 200 here, 100 here, but maybe 200. If you have a very high titer, maybe avoid that. The low dose ITI regimen is a very safe regimen, even though the high dose is better because you can have less bleeding episodes. But we actually found the low dose to be very safe, and we did not find many bleeding episodes in our experience. More people should do ITI, and we should pool in our data and help formulate our own strategies. and see what else can be done to make this more cost effective. And that's the end of my talk. Thank you. I'm happy to take any questions.
Yeah, good afternoon, and thank you, Tulika. Can I be heard?
Yes, yes, ma'am.
Am I heard?
Audible, yes, very well.
Yeah. So thanks, Tulika. That was a very nice practical lecture. And before I go on to the questions asked by the delegates, I just would like to ask you, can you give us just a short idea of the expenses in the low dose which we are doing over here, that are involved, and the expenses involved with the classical high dose ITIs? Just a little approximate idea.
So actually now the factor cost has come down a lot. So I won't be able to give you the actual cost, but we actually at our center, we do 25 units 3 times a week as our prophylaxis. So we have mostly patients who are reimbursable, and we give the intermediate dose prophylaxis. And so what we have found is that if you're using 50 units per kg, it's basically double the cost of your prophylaxis. And that is something quite doable for patients who are on ESI and CGHS. And as I said, most of the patients that we've done ITI have been less than 10 years old and did not have high titer inhibitor. The amount of factor that you're going to use for the high titer would be 200 units per kg. So you're going from 50 units per kg 3 times a week to 200 units per kg daily. So that is really exorbitant, and the advantage is not really there. So I think that's not a strategy that is feasible for most of us in India.
Okay, fine. So we'll take some of the questions from the delegates. The first question has been asked by Dr. Kareem. When antibody production against factor, how are you going to treat those cases by immunosuppressive drugs? What are the drugs you commonly use and the dose?
So rituximab has been used. The Marlborough regimen uses cyclophosphamide, and other immunosuppressants have been used. However, the WFH 2020 does not recommend immunosuppressive agents upfront, except for hemophilia B patients who are on ITI. So I don't have any experience of hemophilia B patients with ITI because one, that's much more risky, causes anaphylaxis, and the responses are much less than hemophilia A patients. Now, for the rituximab, there's a Cochrane review where they reviewed rituximab therapy and they did not find it to be good. I know that several of my colleagues in India have used rituximab, but the Cochrane review was a large series of about 18 cases. What the foreign experts have said about rituximab is that yes, on the short term, it may reduce your antibody production, but the inhibitor may come back. So I don't have experience with immunosuppressants. I had wanted to just get an experience using the classical ITI before I incorporated any variations. And we started this as a study. We were fortunate to have 2 patients who were on the study, and then later on we were able to do a total of 5 patients who were reimbursable. And so we've gained experience on this. And I do think that the immunosuppressant agents can shorten this, but I think we'll have to continue them on other therapy too and follow them later, because if it's a short acting thing, the antibody should not come back. The advantage of this ITI classical is that I have experience that patients even 5 years out continue to be inhibitor free. So that is definitely a good thing. We should always, if we're doing something, we need to see the long-term outcomes as well.
Okay, thanks. Thank you. We actually in our department have used some rituximab, steroids, and cyclophosphamide. Chandrakala, would you like to say a word on this, of what we have used?
Yes, we have used actually along with an ITI, we have used now. In the past, when we didn't had factors, we have used rituximab and cyclophosphamide when we did not had even bypassing agents. So that time we have used and we have seen a good response. But now we have used rituximab in 2 patients on ITI who was inhibitors percently positive. Our ITA also after 9 months they are presently positive. So we use rituximab along with an ITA and they are inhibitor free now. They are in prophylaxis. So we cannot use alone rituximab. We have to use with
Right.
ITI. If they are high risk patients, we can consider rituximab. But data doesn't support actually. Evidence, there is no evidence for this actually.
No, I think we should collect this evidence and look for something.
Okay.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There's another question which says the Bethesda units. What is the average value of Bethesda units with most of the patients?
So
That's a bit difficult to.
I think it's. I think what we have to realize is that patients will get inhibitors at different time points. Sometimes it also depends on whether it's after surgery. Often those patients will have very high titers. Some patients will have low. The most important predictor is actually the genetics. Unfortunately, we don't have genetic data on our patients, but there are families where all of them will get very high titer inhibitors. So there's no average as such, but if you have family information, like if you know a brother or a cousin or an uncle had a high titer, then it's very likely that this other patient will also get a high titer.
Yeah, so the titers basically can vary on individual patients. It could be anything as low as 5 Bethesda units and go up to even 200 or 300. We can't really predict that. The next question says that this is, I think, from a patient who says he has hemophilia A. He was taking factor VIII since birth. But in 2016, he got anaphylaxis 5 to 8 times and tested positive for inhibitors. After that, he took factor VII. Now in March 21, he's negative for inhibitors. But on taking factor VIII, he's still getting anaphylaxis. So he wants to know what he can do since he needs factor VIII lifelong.
So the thing I would...
It's rare to get anaphylaxis.
Okay, so anaphylaxis is more common with patients who have hemophilia B, but I would want the patient to be checked again for inhibitors, because if you don't take factor for some time, the inhibitor titer may actually come down. The only thing is that some of these patients, when they are exposed to factor again, they may have an anamnestic response in which the inhibitor may come back. Because actually, just because you've not provoked it, the inhibitor looks like it's disappeared, but because there's no immune tolerance induction that is done, on any exposure, they may again develop an inhibitor. So I hope this is not an inhibitor again, but I think it should be a good idea to recheck.
Okay. There is a question, there are a couple of questions which are not related to this topic, so I'm not going to take them. One question now is, can inhibitor titer level more than 500 Bethesda units start ITI? I think Dr. Seth has already answered this in her lecture. You just want to reiterate, Tulika?
So in the West, they actually do go ahead and do it. And they recommend for high titer inhibitors, they should use the high dose regimen. I think in India, we have to realize that we have limitations. So I think if anybody's starting to do ITI, don't take a very high risk patient. Start with a patient who has a good chance. And once you've got success, once your lab and everybody has experience, then if you want to and you have the abilities of doing a high dose regimen, then definitely go ahead. In the West, there is no limitation as such, but we are not the West.
Yeah. Oh, this is a good question. What is the recurrence rate of inhibitor after successful ITI after instituting prophylaxis? Independent if the factor is same or different from the previous one.
So there's very little data on recurrence of ITI in the West, primarily because most of these patients are put on prophylaxis. So that is a very important thing that we need to do. Though of course there may be a few patients who may have their inhibitors come back. In India, I have seen some patients who got some ITI and then they were on on-demand therapy and the inhibitor came back. So I think I don't have numbers of how much is there that comes back, but I think it's really, really important to remember, if you have a patient who cannot go on to prophylaxis, then it's probably not a good idea to do ITI on such a patient, because inevitably the inhibitor will come back in the future.
Okay. The next question is, in case of emergency bleeding, how much dose of ITI is required?
So in an emergency, if you need surgery or you have a bleed, then you have to go with bypassing agent. The ITI is a slow process. It may take 6 months, 9 months, 2 years. So there's no emergency in ITI. If somebody needs surgery, it's not something that, okay, let's quickly do ITI and get the inhibitor to go away, because it's not very predictable. Some patients I've had, the inhibitor disappeared in 3 months, but that was just in 1 or 2 patients who had very low titer inhibitor. The majority of patients, the eradication took 9 months. So if you have an emergency, use bypassing agents, don't do ITI.
Right. Thank you so much, Dr. Tulika. And with that, we'll come to the end of this particular lecture. Like I said, there are a couple of questions dealing with specific treatment not related to this lecture. I request the delegates to please ask questions related to the particular lecture which is going on.